So we do see COVID patients here. Um, and the challenge has been the impact on the whole health system because people are scared. Health workers, understandably, are scared. Patients are scared to come to the hospital. So we find when we first started having those kind of patients here, the numbers of other patients reduced. And it took quite a couple of weeks, really, of quite high-level publicity and really trying to talk to people and persuade people actually it is safe to come to the hospital if you're sick. So the downstream effect was that we actually saw quite a high level of malnutrition.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Greg Glyer podcast. Today, I have a really special guest with me from Liberia. It's Dr. Mikey. Dr. Mikey, how are you doing? Thank you for tuning in.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Greg. It's really good to be here. So we're live from ELWA Hospital here in Liberia. So thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, it's our pleasure. So I would love to get right into it. Would you mind just going over your story? How did you end up working at a hospital in Liberia? Where do you come from? And just tell everyone about who you are.
Sure. So I actually grew up in West Africa. I lived in Senegal, which is about 3 countries up from here. Lived there for 11 years as a child. Left there when I was 16. And when I left, I always had this kind of passion to do medical work, particularly involving children. After my brother got really ill at one point and got treated and got better, and it was very exciting just to see what could be done. And I remember at the time feeling a great sense of compassion for a lot of the African children who were living around us and a sense of wanting to do something. So I went to medical school in Cardiff in Wales. Went through 5 years of that and then worked for a few years and then went to Sierra Leone, which is the next door neighbor of Liberia. Worked in a hospital known as the Aberdeen Women's Center. Worked there for the best part of 2 years. I was the pediatric clinical lead there and then went back, did some more training in the UK and came back again towards the end of the Ebola outbreak, again in that same role, but also coordinating the hospital's Ebola response. And that was just for a few months. And then had a little more time back in Wales and then spent another year out in the east of Sierra Leone in a rural hospital, setting up a pediatric ward and a blood bank and a few other projects. And then that came to an end and was a little bit of a loose end. So we were just thinking about what to do. And in the end, got in touch with ELWA Hospital, had some ideas around running an under 5s project here, and that just sort of came to life really. So we've been out here since January 2019.
That's awesome. So I don't think everyone quite understands the level of trauma that Ebola caused in Western Africa. So would you mind talking about your role and some of the things you saw during that time?
Yeah, so my role was not actually in a treatment unit. It was more in the hospital, and we set up a little isolation area outside. So we would isolate the suspected cases and try to keep the rest of the hospital running. So that was the maternity, the pediatrics. We were doing some surgical fistula work as well. And so most of my role was just seeing the suspected patients and keeping them off. And the hard thing was at the time, we didn't have a very rapid way of doing testing. So it would sometimes take a day or 2 days to get that. So what would happen is we would have to take these patients off to the Ebola treatment units, sometimes awaiting a test. And the challenge there is that you want with everything you could to be very hands-on with these children, particularly to bring them into the hospital, to give them everything they needed. But there was always this sense of, well, we need to be doing all the personal protection and the PPE and all this stuff. So until we had a result either way. So it was not always easy. And we did, a couple of times we'd have people just collapse outside the hospital. I remember one guy just turning up, he was vomiting blood everywhere. And, that was really hard. And amazingly, he survived. But it was just very hard trying to balance the safety of the hospital with the risk of everything else.
So I would imagine that there are some parallels between what you went through with Ebola and then what you're recently going through with COVID-19. So what are some of the parallels, and what are you seeing right now with COVID-19 in particular?
Sure. So with COVID, it is different. I mean, it's the same in some ways. The setup's the same in that we have an isolation unit here at ELWA. We call it the respiratory unit. So anybody with those symptoms who's severely sick goes in there, and we generally arrange for testing here, and then if necessary, they're transferred on to a COVID unit. But often they'll be with us for several days while the testing is carried out. So we do see COVID patients here. And the challenge has been the impact on the whole health system because people are scared. Health workers, understandably, are scared. Patients are scared to come to the hospital. So we find when we first started having those kind of patients here, the numbers of other patients reduced. And it took quite a couple of weeks, really, of quite high-level publicity and really trying to talk to people and persuade people actually it is safe to come to the hospital if you're sick. So the downstream effect was that we actually saw quite a high level of malnutrition. Really, we had the first few cases March, April, and then really May and into this month is when we've seen the malnutrition as a result of people not being able to get help so easily. But amazingly, the hospital is very much open and alive. We're seeing large numbers of patients. We're continuing operations, and we're determined to do that. So there are similarities.
So I'm very curious right now about the malnutrition side of things. One of the things I've been seeing, UNICEF has predicted 1.2 million children might die. The UN is saying perhaps 50 million people might drop below the extreme poverty line because of this. So can you talk about the rise in malnutrition cases that you're seeing and how it's different than kind of the levels it was at before the crisis?
Sure. I mean, before what would happen is we would have we have our malnutrition clinics usually Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we'd normally have maybe 40, 50 kids come who are malnourished. And today, I mean, I've literally just come from it, and we've had well over 60 who meet the criteria just in one day. And then of those, a lot of them are just being a lot sicker because they're coming later. So the number being admitted into hospital is much, much higher, probably about twice as high now as it was pre-COVID. And they're coming with other complications. They're coming with tuberculosis. They're coming with HIV. And so it's just higher. It's just more intense. And people, if they're in a lockdown, it's hard for them to get food sometimes as well. So it's a huge challenge there in terms of knowing what to do, how to do things rightfully. And so I mean, the good news is we are able to stay open, and we've had a good delivery of the Plumpy Nut supplies. The challenge as well is just keeping the whole thing operating because we need more beds, we need more medicine, we need more of the therapeutic milks. You know, the demand is always there, so our capacity can always increase if that makes sense. And we've had some heartbreaking stories. I mean, we've had some. Really, we've had things like, 2-year-old children weighing less than 4 kilos, which is just tiny. I mean, we've got a little 6-month child on bed who weighs just 2.5 kilos. It's really tragic, a lot of what we're seeing here.
Yeah, it's I can only imagine how tough it must be right now. I know that people who are listening to this are going to want to do something. So we have a few projects set up for you all on DonorSee through Margot's account, who you work with Margot at ELWA.
Yeah.
So would you mind talking about what some of those projects are and how they're going to directly impact the work that you're doing on the ground?
Sure. So the most important project right now is the Bubble CPAP project. So just to explain about that, we have a very limited amount of care that we have here for neonates and children with severe respiratory problems. The reason for that is we just have oxygen. We don't have ventilators. We don't have an ICU. We don't really have a lot of the machines and technology that you would have in the West. And that is, it's a problem that's all over Liberia. Nobody in Liberia is really ventilating children. And it's a challenge. And so what we've done is we've set up a little project to run and to fund some airway pressure machines. They're called CPAP, so continuous positive airway pressure machines. And what they do is when you have a child who has got severe respiratory distress and they're using oxygen, but they're still breathing fast, those machines basically keep their lungs open and prevent the lungs from collapsing on themselves. And we have a kind of a rudimentary way of doing it here involving bottles and surgical clamps and one or two other little things, but it doesn't really work as well as we'd like it to. We can't control the pressure. So what we've got set up here is a lot, if we can get these machines, it will be a lot better than the current setup, and it will save directly. I mean, you're talking about dozens of lives every month being saved by this directly, just by having this machine. So we're aiming to try and get 2 machines. We usually have several babies who need it, but if we can at least start with 2, at least get the staff trained to use those 2 machines, then we'll see some good results, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the key things here is that you understand the need for the staff to have training on how to use this. When I used to live in Malawi, we would want to raise for medical equipment like ICU beds for babies and stuff like that. But the reality was that unless you can train the staff, then the equipment might just sit there. But the great thing about ELWA and you and Margot is you're in a position to not only receive these machines that will save dozens of lives a month, but you can train the staff so that it will continue to save lives every single month ongoing. And so it's just a really important factor in what you're doing. So yeah, we're thrilled to partner with you and Margot, and I'm just really grateful for your work, and really grateful that the people of Liberia have someone there who is as well trained as you are. Would you mind talking a little bit more about some of the downstream effects you're expecting from this chaotic time, like these malnourishment cases? I'm wondering, how long do you think we're going to continue seeing them? It seems like there's this hunger crisis that's looming, and I'm trying to figure out how long is this going to last. Do you think people will bounce back quick, or is this going to be a longer term thing? What's your read on the situation?
Sure. I mean, I think this is going to be with us for a while because COVID is not going anywhere. COVID is, I mean, it's reducing. The numbers are dropping off in some countries, but Liberia, we're just at the beginning of the curve. So this is still really new to the country, and it's not spreading in the same way as it's spreading at home. It's spreading at a kind of a steady state rather than a rapid state, which means, unfortunately, we're going to have this here for years to come. And it's actually going to become more about managing the effects of it rather than trying to, I think eradicating it completely is going to be very, very difficult. I'm not saying we shouldn't try, but it's going to be very hard. So it's more about managing it. And actually, the reality is the effects of it downstream are going to continue. So the whole kind of cycle of poverty where people can't get an education, and then they can't get into school, into college, they can't get jobs. That's going to be with us for a long time because schooling has been closed, which is understandable given the situation. So people may not graduate, so they may then not get a job. A lot of businesses have been closed down, so people have less money available. Everybody lives on a, hand-to-mouth basis. So, people's ability to feed their child is dependent on their ability to sell a pair of flip-flops or sell a bit of plastic or whatever it is they're selling. That's how most people survive. And if that isn't able to maintain, then the whole economy remains fragile. So it's very, very important that things try to get back to normal on some level. So I think this is going to be with us for a while. I mean, there is still a fear of health facilities. Some hospitals in Monrovia have not reopened yet, really at all. Some of them have, which is great. Other ones are still figuring out their reopening plans. So the whole thing is very challenging, really. And I think we're looking at years rather than months that we're going to see increasing cases. And the reality is malnutrition will be here for a long time. A lot of it is underlying conditions. Children who have tuberculosis, HIV, if that's undiagnosed and untreated, then they go malnourished, and often that's hidden away in the communities. So we've got to try to get into those communities and connect and try to help where we can, really.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that people need to understand is that with malnourishment, the malnourishment can exacerbate other issues that are facing people in this community. So malaria, tuberculosis, HIV/AIDS, a lot of or cholera, a lot of these different issues may be like right below the surface, and then malnutrition can kick it off and make it much worse. So, anyways, I'm just really grateful for the work that you're doing. Um, we have our audience is mostly made up of people in America or other Western countries. A lot of them have not traveled abroad. They're not familiar with some of the same economic dynamics. If you could tell them, if you could kind of give them one message that you'd want them to understand about what the people of Liberia are going through right now, what would you say to that group of people who, they're eager to learn more, but they haven't had the opportunity yet?
Sure. So the main challenge, and I'm from the UK, so what we have in the UK is we have the NHS, we have a National Health Service, and it's wonderful. I'm a huge fan of the NHS. And the reason I'm a huge fan is that when there is a crisis or when you get sick or when something happens, it's there for you. And everybody pays into it, everybody contributes, and it helps everybody and anybody who needs it. And it's become strange because of COVID, but it's still there and it's still alive and the people are still functioning. Liberia doesn't have anything like that. There is very limited social security. There isn't a nationalized health service that's free at the point of care. And so when somebody gets sick or somebody gets malnourished, it's very hard for them to get in unless there are special projects like what ELWA is running with the malnutrition. If you have a special project like that, then it's a lifeline. Because otherwise, without it, people have nothing. There is nowhere for these people to go. There is no fallback option. They're just stuck at home, sometimes starving, which is why we set this thing up. So I just encourage people, it's hard unless you've seen it. Sometimes it's hard to believe that there are entire countries that are in this situation where there is no real nationalized service that's free. And so that's what we're doing is really just a drop in the bucket. I mean, it's great, but we're only just starting to scratch the surface of the malnutrition challenge and the respiratory challenge as well. There are 4.5, 5 million people in Liberia, and we're seeing hundreds each week, but there's still a whole reserve of people who don't have that backup system. So what I would say is we are the lifeline. We are it. So that's a huge challenge, but if you want to give to something that's actually directly having an impact on people directly, then investing in these children's lives is a great investment. I mean, and I don't take a salary for this. This is entirely voluntary, so there's no money goes to anything else. As soon as the money arrives, it goes straight to buying these machines, or with the malnutrition, it goes straight to buying Plumpy Nut. There's no loss anywhere, and there's no fat in our system at this end.
Yeah, well, we're really grateful for the work that you're doing. We're going to shout it from the rooftops because people need to, there are a few situations in life where it's a resource problem. There's a lot of situations in life where, there's all sorts of complexities, like the homeless crisis in America. There's mental health issues, there's drug issues, there's this complexity of layers. What's really unique about your situation is it's purely a resource problem. If there's enough money, then we can buy machines that will save lives. It's like very direct. And so it's just a really unique situation. So I hope a lot of people give generously to not only this project, but tons of more projects that you all will be doing, because it's just really important work. And you all, you're underfunded. You all need more funding. So we're gonna do everything we can to help you with that.
Great. Well, thank you. And it's hugely appreciated. I mean, anything people can give. And I know there are hardships at home. I know people are facing concerns with jobs. And, that's sad. I get that. And I do have sympathy. So if people give in this time, it's incredibly generous. And I do appreciate that.
Gotcha. Well, Dr. Mikey, thank you very much for being with us. And again, thank you for the work that you're doing.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to everyone who's donated.
Okay, take care.